It was a cold, moonless night in the small town of Willow Creek. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of a whimper. Special Agent Mark Harris, a seasoned FBI agent with over 15 years of experience, was driving back to his motel after a long day of investigating a series of burglaries in the area. His mind was preoccupied with the case, but something about the sound made him hit the brakes. He stepped out of his car, the cold air biting at his face. The sound was coming from under the old wooden bridge that spanned the river just outside of town. Mark grabbed his flashlight and cautiously made his way down the embankment. The beam of light revealed a sight that made his heart sink: a pregnant dog, shivering and whimpering, her eyes filled with fear and pain. Mark knelt beside her, his training kicking in. He assessed the situation quickly. The dog was in labor, but something was wrong. She was struggling, and it was clear she needed help. Mark knew he couldn't leave her there. He gently wrapped her in his jacket and carried her to his car, his mind racing with questions. Who had left her here? Why was she alone under the bridge? As he drove to the nearest animal hospital, the dog's whimpers softened, as if she knew she was in safe hands. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a stray dog in distress. There was something about her eyes, something that spoke of a story untold. The animal hospital was a small, cozy place run by Dr. Emily Carter, a kind-hearted veterinarian who had dedicated her life to helping animals in need. When Mark burst through the door with a pregnant dog in his arms, Dr. Carter immediately sprang into action. "She's in labor, but something's not right," Mark said, his voice filled with urgency. Dr. Carter nodded, her hands moving swiftly as she examined the dog. "She's malnourished and dehydrated. This is going to be a difficult delivery." As Dr. Carter worked, Mark paced the waiting room, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. He decided to call his partner, Special Agent Lisa Morales, who was back at the motel. "Lisa, I need you to meet me at the animal hospital. I found a pregnant dog under the bridge, and something about this doesn't sit right with me." Within minutes, Lisa arrived, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "What's going on, Mark?" "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling this dog is connected to something bigger. Maybe the burglaries we've been investigating. We need to find out who she belongs to." As they waited for news from Dr. Carter, Mark and Lisa began to piece together what little information they had. The dog was a purebred German Shepherd, a breed often used in police and military work. She was well trained, but her condition suggested she had been neglected for some time. Hours passed before Dr. Carter finally emerged from the operating room. She looked exhausted but relieved. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Carter said, "and so are her puppies." She gave birth to 5 healthy pups. Mark and Lisa breathed a sigh of relief, but their work was far from over. They needed to find out who the dog belonged to and why she had been left under the bridge. As they examined the dog more closely, Lisa noticed something unusual. "Mark, look at this." She pointed to the dog's collar, which had a small, almost imperceptible engraving on the inside. It was a series of numbers and letters that didn't make sense at first glance. "It's a code," Mark said, his eyes narrowing. "We need to figure out what it means." They spent the next few hours trying to decipher the code, using every resource at their disposal. Finally, they cracked it. The code was a reference to a classified military project, one that had been shut down years ago due to ethical concerns. "This dog was part of a military experiment," Lisa said, her voice filled with disbelief. "But why would they leave her here?" Mark's mind raced. Maybe she wasn't left here. Maybe she escaped. And if she did, someone might be looking for her. The revelation that the dog was part of a classified military project changed everything. Mark and Lisa knew they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had initially thought. They needed to find out who was behind this and why the dog had been abandoned. They started by reaching out to their contacts in the military, but everyone they spoke to denied any knowledge of the project. It was as if the dog had never existed. But Mark and Lisa knew better. They had seen the evidence with their own eyes. As they dug deeper, they discovered that the project had been shut down after a whistleblower had exposed the unethical treatment of the animals involved. The whistleblower had disappeared shortly after, and the case had been buried. "This is bigger than we thought," Lisa said. "If someone is trying to cover this up, they are not going to stop until they get what they want." Mark nodded. "And what they want is this dog. We need to keep her safe." They decided to move the dog and her puppies to a secure location, away from prying eyes. But they knew it was only a matter of time before whoever was behind this would come looking for her. The next few days were a blur of activity. Mark and Lisa worked tirelessly to protect the dog and her puppies, while also trying to uncover the truth behind the military project. They knew they were running out of time. One night, as they were transferring the dog to a new safe house, they were ambushed. A group of armed men surrounded their car, demanding they hand over the dog. Mark and Lisa were outnumbered, but they weren't about to give up without a fight. They managed to hold off the attackers long enough to call for backup, but not before one of the men got too close to the dog. In a moment of desperation, Mark made a split-second decision. He released the dog, hoping she would run to safety. To his surprise, she didn't run. Instead, she stood her ground, growling at the attackers with a ferocity that surprised everyone. The men hesitated, giving Mark and Lisa the opening they needed to escape. They drove away as fast as they could, the dog safely in the back seat. As they caught their breath, Mark looked at the dog in the rearview mirror. "You're not just any dog, are you?" he said softly. The dog looked back at him, her eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed almost human. Mark knew then that they were in this together, and that they would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Mark and Lisa drove through the night, their hearts pounding as they put as much distance as possible between themselves and the attackers. The dog, now named Bella by Dr. Carter, lay quietly in the back seat, her puppies nestled close to her. The agents had managed to secure a remote safe house deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. It was a small cabin, surrounded by towering trees and a sense of isolation that felt both comforting and eerie. As they pulled up to the cabin, Lisa glanced at Mark. "Do you think we're safe here?" Mark sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "For now, but we need to stay alert. Whoever those men were, they are not going to give up easily." They carried Bella and her puppies inside, setting up a makeshift bed for them near the fireplace. The warmth seemed to calm the dog, and she curled up with her pups, her eyes never leaving Mark and Lisa. As the agents settled in, they began to piece together what little they knew. The military project, the whistleblower, the armed men. It all pointed to something far more sinister than they had initially imagined. But what was a connection? And why was Bella so important? Mark pulled out his laptop and began digging deeper into the classified files they had uncovered. Lisa, meanwhile, kept watch, her hand resting on her gun as she peered out the window into the dark forest. Hours passed, and the tension in the cabin was palpable. Bella's occasional whimpers were the only sound breaking the silence. Mark finally leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I think I found something." Lisa turned to him, her eyes wide. "What is it?" The military project was called Operation Guardian. It was supposed to create highly trained dogs for special ops missions. But something went wrong. The dogs were too intelligent, too independent. They started showing signs of empathy. The project was shut down, and all the dogs were supposed to be euthanized. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. But Bella survived. She escaped. Mark nodded. And now someone wants her back. But why? What's so special about her? As if in response, Bella let out a soft whine, her eyes locking with Mark's. In that moment, he felt a connection, a bond that went beyond words. He knew then that they were in this together, and that they would stop at nothing to protect her. The next morning, Mark and Lisa decided to track down the whistleblower who had exposed Operation Guardian. His name was Dr. Samuel Reynolds, a former scientist who had disappeared shortly after the project was shut down. If anyone knew the truth about Bella, it was him. They started by reaching out to their contacts in the intelligence community, but no one had heard from Dr. Reynolds in years. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. But Mark and Lisa weren't about to give up. After hours of digging, they finally found a lead, a small town in the middle of nowhere where Dr. Reynolds was rumored to have been seen. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. They left Bella and her puppies in the care of Dr. Carter, who had agreed to watch over them while they were gone. As they drove to the town, the tension between them was palpable. They both knew the risk, but they also knew they had no choice. When they arrived, the town was eerily quiet. The streets were empty, and the few people they saw avoided eye contact. It was clear that something was off. They finally tracked down a man who claimed to know Dr. Reynolds. He led them to a rundown house on the outskirts of town, where they found a scientist living in squalor. Dr. Reynolds was a shadow of his former self, his eyes hollow and his hands trembling. But when Mark mentioned Operation Guardian, a spark of life returned to his eyes. "You found her, didn't you?" he whispered. "You found Bella." Mark nodded. "We need to know the truth. Why is she so important?" Dr. Reynolds took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bella isn't just a dog. She's the key to everything. She was the first to show signs of true empathy, of understanding human emotions. They wanted to use her to create a new breed of soldiers, ones that could feel, that could connect with their handlers on a deeper level. But when the project was shut down, they tried to destroy her. She escaped, and they've been looking for her ever since." Lisa's eyes widened. "But why? What do they want with her now?" Dr. Reynolds looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. "They want to finish what they started. They want to use her to create something even more dangerous. And if they find her, they won't stop until they have her." Chapter 8. The Betrayal. Mark and Lisa left Dr. Reynolds' house with more questions than answers. They knew they were running out of time, and they needed to get back to Bella as soon as possible. But as they drove back to the safe house, they noticed something strange. A black SUV following them at a distance. Mark's heart raced as he realized they had been compromised. "We need to lose them," he said, his voice tense. Lisa nodded, her eyes glued to the row view mirror. "Hold on." She swerved off the main road, taking a series of back roads and dirt paths in an attempt to shake their pursuers. But the SUV stayed close, its headlights glaring in the darkness. Finally, Mark spotted an old barn up ahead. "In there," he shouted. Lisa pulled into the barn, and they quickly hid the car behind a stack of hay bales. They waited in silence, their hearts pounding as the SUV drove past. But just as they thought they were safe, the barn door creaked open. Mark and Lisa drew their guns, ready for a fight. But what they saw made their blood run cold. Standing in the doorway was one of their own, a fellow FBI agent named Jack Thompson. He had been part of their team, someone they had trusted implicitly. "Jack," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Jack's face was grim as he stepped forward. "I'm sorry, guys, but I can't let you take this any further." Mark's eyes narrowed. "You're working for them, aren't you?" Jack nodded. "They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. But it doesn't have to end this way. Just hand over the dog, and I'll make sure you walk away." Mark and Lisa exchanged a glance, their minds racing. They knew they were outnumbered, but they also knew they couldn't betray Bella. "We're not giving her up," Mark said, his voice firm. Jack sighed, raising his gun. "I was afraid you'd say that." The tension in the barn was palpable as Mark and Lisa faced off against Jack. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. But they knew they couldn't give up. Not now, not ever. "Jack, think about what you're doing," Lisa said, her voice pleading. "This isn't you. You're better than this." Jack hesitated, his grip on the gun tightening. "You don't understand. They have my family. If I don't do this, they'll kill them." Mark's heart sank. He knew what it was like to be backed into a corner, to feel like there was no way out. But he also knew that betraying Bella wasn't the answer. "We can help you," Mark said, his voice steady. "But you have to trust us." Jack's eyes flickered with uncertainty. But before he could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. The black SUV had returned, and this time it wasn't alone. "We're out of time," Lisa said, her voice urgent. "We need to go. Now." Mark nodded, grabbing Jack by the arm. "Come with us. We'll figure this out together." Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's go." They made a break for the car, bullets whizzing past them as they ran. Mark and Lisa returned fire, covering Jack as they made their escape. They managed to get the car started and sped off into the night, the sound of gunfire fading behind them. As they drove, Jack slumped in the back seat, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want it to come to this." Mark glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "We'll get through this, but we need to stick together." Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "And we need to protect Bella, no matter what." They arrived back at the safe house just as the sun was beginning to rise. Dr. Carter was waiting for them, her face filled with relief as they pulled up. "Thank God you're okay," she said, rushing to meet them. "Bella's been restless all night." I think she knew something was wrong. Mark and Lisa exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. They knew they were running out of time, and they needed to come up with a plan, fast. As they entered the cabin, Bella immediately perked up, her tail wagging as she saw them. She bounded over to Mark, nuzzling his hand as if to say thank you. Mark knelt down, scratching her behind the ears. "We're not going to let anything happen to you," he said softly. "I promise." Lisa joined them, her eyes filled with determination. "We need to figure out our next move. We can't keep running forever." Mark nodded, his mind racing. "We need to expose the truth. We need to bring Operation Guardian to light, once and for all." Jack, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I can help. I have access to classified files, evidence that could bring them down. But it's risky. If they find out." "We'll take that risk," Lisa said, her voice firm. "We have to." Mark looked at Bella, her eyes filled with trust and loyalty. He knew then that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for her, for the truth, and for the bond that had brought them all together. As they began to formulate their plan, Bella curled up at their feet, her puppies nestled close to her. In that moment, they knew they were in this together, and that no matter what happened, they would face it as a team. The cabin was filled with tension as Mark, Lisa, Jack, and Dr. Carter huddled around the table, their faces illuminated by the dim light of a single lantern. Bella lay at their feet, her ears perked up as if she understood the gravity of the situation. Her puppies were asleep nearby, blissfully unaware of the danger that loomed over them. Mark spread out a map on the table, his finger tracing a route to a remote military facility. "This is where we need to go," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's where they are keeping the rest of the files on Operation Guardian. If we can get our hands on those, we can expose everything." Lisa nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the map. "But it's heavily guarded. How do we get in without getting caught?" Jack leaned forward, his face grim. "I still have my clearance. I can get us in, but once we're inside, we're on our own. If they find out what we're doing, we'll deal with that when we get there," Mark interrupted. "Right now, we need to focus on the mission. Bella's life and the lives of her puppies depend on us." Dr. Carter, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What about Bella? We can't just leave her here. What if they find her?" Mark glanced at Bella, who was watching him intently. "She's coming with us. She's part of this now, and we're not leaving her behind." The group fell silent, the weight of their decision settling over them. They knew the risks, but they also knew they had no choice. They had to see this through, no matter what. As they prepared to leave, Mark knelt beside Bella, scratching her behind the ears. "You're a brave girl," he said softly. "We're going to make this right. I promise." Bella licked his hand, her eyes filled with trust. In that moment, Mark felt a surge of determination. They were going to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The drive to the military facility was tense, the silence in the car broken only by the occasional whimper from Bella's puppies. Mark, Lisa, and Jack were all on edge, their minds racing with the possibilities of what could go wrong. When they arrived, Jack used his clearance to get them through the first set of gates. But as they approached the main building, they were stopped by a guard who eyed them suspiciously. "What's your business here?" the guard asked, his hand resting on his gun. Jack flashed his badge, his voice calm but authoritative. "We're here on official FBI business. We need to access the archives." The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed, but keep it quick." As they entered the building, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The corridors were dimly lit, the air thick with tension. They made their way to the archives, where Jack used his clearance to access the files on Operation Guardian. The files were extensive, detailing the experiments, the dogs, and the unethical practices that had led to the project's shutdown. But what caught their attention was a single file labeled Bella, Subject Alpha. Mark opened the file, his heart racing as he read through the documents. Bella wasn't just a test subject. She was the first successful result of the project. She had shown signs of advanced empathy, the ability to understand and respond to human emotions in ways that no other animal could. "This is it," Mark whispered. "This is the proof we need." But before they could make a copy of the files, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. They were running out of time. The group quickly gathered the files and made a break for the exit, but they were too late. The guards had been alerted, and the facility was now on lockdown. "We need to find another way out," Lisa said, her voice urgent. Jack led them through a series of back corridors, his knowledge of the facility proving invaluable. But the guards were closing in, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they were caught. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a group of armed guards. There was no way out. But then, something unexpected happened. Bella, who had been quietly following them, suddenly stepped forward, her body tense and her eyes locked on the guards. She let out a low growl, her presence commanding attention. The guards hesitated, their guns wavering. In that moment of uncertainty, Mark and Lisa seized the opportunity. They disarmed the guards and made a break for the exit, Bella leading the way. As they ran, Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Bella wasn't just a dog, she was a hero, and she had just saved their lives. They managed to escape the facility, the files safely in their possession, but they knew they weren't out of the woods yet. They needed to get the evidence to the right people, and they needed to do it fast. They drove to a secure location, where they met with a trusted journalist who had agreed to help them expose the truth. As they handed over the files, Mark felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had uncovered the truth. But as they prepared to leave, Jack pulled Mark aside. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I wasn't completely honest with you. I wasn't just working for them because they had my family. I was part of the project. I helped create Bella." Mark's heart sank as he processed Jack's words. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Jack said, "and because I want to make things right. Bella deserves that." Mark nodded, his mind racing. He knew that Jack's revelation changed everything, but he also knew that they had to focus on the task at hand. They had to expose the truth, no matter what. The story of Operation Guardian and Bella's role in it made headlines around the world. The public outcry was immediate, and the military was forced to shut down the project for good. Mark, Lisa, and Jack were hailed as heroes, but they knew that the real hero was Bella. As they stood together, watching Bella play with her puppies in the safety of Dr. Carter's clinic, Mark felt a sense of peace. They had fought for the truth, and they had won. But more importantly, they had protected Bella and her puppies, ensuring that they would never have to face the horrors of the project again. "We did it," Lisa said, her voice filled with emotion. "We really did it." Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving Bella. "Yeah, we did." As they prepared to leave, Mark knelt beside Bella, scratching her behind the ears one last time. "You're a brave girl," he said softly, "and you're safe now. That's all that matters." Bella licked his hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. In that moment, Mark knew that they had done the right thing. They had fought for the truth, and they had protected the bond between man and dog. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and captivating tales. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Mark and Lisa's shoes? Do you think Bella's story could inspire real change? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay tuned for more stories that will keep you glued till the very end. Until next time, remember, sometimes the bravest heroes have 4 paws.